House prices have doubled in the last 15 years and earnings have gone up by like 25 or 30%. So there you see unaffordability reigns, locking your generation out of home ownership. 25 to 34-year-olds, 62% of them owned their own home in the early 90s. It's now less than 30%. So more than half of a whole generation at childbearing age, family forming age, household forming age are locked out of home ownership.
In 1999, 25 to 34-year-olds in the UK had a home ownership rate of 55%. By around 2017, this number had dropped to 35%. Yes, 35%. Representing a decrease of over 20% in home ownership among young and middle-aged people in the UK. Sadly, the statistics do not show promising signs for future generations either, meaning that many people in this age group cannot afford to buy a house with decent living conditions. The main problem behind this trend is that many of these young adults simply cannot afford to buy or rent a house, which prevents them from moving out and living independently. Rising house prices, high rental costs, and the difficulty of saving for a deposit make it challenging for them to establish their own households, forcing a growing number of young people to remain in the family home for longer periods. And if we look deeper into the analytics, things are actually worse than we might have thought. Nearly 98% of adults living with their parents in the UK cannot afford to buy the average first-time home on their own income. Even if no deposit were required, about 97% would still face housing costs exceeding 45% of their income, which is widely considered unaffordable. This demonstrates that the core barrier is not just saving for a deposit, but rather overall affordability and income constraints, making it extremely difficult for young adults to step onto the property ladder and live independently. As a result, many remain financially dependent on their families for longer periods, delaying life milestones such as moving out, starting a household, or building savings. And right now in the UK, average rents cost around £1,400 per month. And when you add essentials like deposits, bills, and other basic expenses, this becomes a seriously heavy burden. It also does not seem to be slowing down or getting cheaper. In 2023 to 2024, rents increased by around 8.7%, and in 2024 to 2025, they rose by about 7%. This might look like a slowdown at first glance, but when we look at the overall condition of the market, prices are still rising at a level far too high to make the situation feel stable or affordable. With a gap this large, a £1,400 rent is extremely expensive when the average monthly salary in the UK is around £2,500. This means rent often takes over 50% of a person's income. And when we add other unavoidable costs, such as utility bills, council tax, groceries, and unexpected problems like roof leaks or plumbing breakdowns, the real monthly cost becomes even higher. In many cases, the money left after these expenses is simply not enough to cover other basic needs. And I'm not even talking about luxury spending here. This level of financial pressure leaves the average person in the UK with very limited room to save, invest, or plan for the future. When such a large share of income is locked into rent and essential living costs, building any form of financial stability becomes extremely difficult. This means many people struggle to save for long-term goals such as buying a home, starting a family, or securing their future. Over time, this doesn't only affect individuals. It slows broader economic activity as lower disposable income reduces consumption, limits savings, and weakens participation in long-term financial markets. This situation also creates a long-term structural risk for the UK economy. When a large portion of the population is unable to access affordable housing, labour mobility decreases. People become less willing or able to move to cities or regions where better job opportunities exist, simply because housing costs make relocation unrealistic. This reduces productivity growth and limits the efficient matching of workers to jobs. In other words, the housing crisis doesn't just affect where people live. It affects how the entire labour market functions, ultimately slowing national economic growth. At the same time, rising housing costs increase financial vulnerability. With little room left in monthly budgets, even small economic shocks, such as a temporary job loss, illness, or interest rate changes, can push households into serious financial distress. This increases reliance on government support systems and social services, adding extra pressure on public finances. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. High housing costs weaken household resilience, which increases state spending, while reduced private sector activity lowers tax revenues. The result is a system. Another important link in this chain is how housing directly influences inflation and interest rate policy. In the UK, housing and household-related costs make up roughly 1/3 of the consumer price index basket. That means when rents rise quickly, they don't just affect tenants. They push national inflation higher. In recent years, private rental prices have been increasing at around 7 to 9% annually, consistently outpacing wage growth. This keeps inflation stubbornly elevated even when other sectors begin to cool, forcing the Bank of England to hold interest rates higher for longer. And this is where the cycle tightens. Higher interest rates increase mortgage costs and raise borrowing expenses for developers, slowing down new construction. Fewer homes being built keeps supply low, which pushes rents and house prices even higher. So, the housing crisis is no longer just a property market issue. It has become a key force shaping monetary policy and the wider financial system. Until housing inflation is brought under control, real affordability and economic stability will remain out of reach. And that brings us to the final question. Can the UK break this cycle in time? Or will housing continue to be the weight holding the entire economy back? Now, the responsibility shifts to the UK government. The policies they choose in the coming months, from planning reform and house building targets to rental regulation and taxation, will shape not only the property market, but the future living standards of an entire generation. Every decision made today will determine whether young families can afford a home, whether rents stay manageable, and whether economic pressure on ordinary people finally eases. In many ways, the housing strategy adopted now will decide what kind of country the UK becomes in the next decade. We can only hope that these actions lead to real solutions, not just short-term fixes, because the stakes have never been higher. The future of millions depends on it. And that's where I'll leave it to you. What do you think? Can the UK government actually solve this housing crisis, or is the system already too deep in the cycle? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video valuable, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the UK housing market, property trends, and economic shifts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.